is the nicest spread at any event we've ever participated in. So.
The first question, you part of the organization here?
I am part of this organization, yes. We are Citizens Action Coalition. We are a nonprofit consumer and environmental advocacy group. So we were founded here in Indiana back in 1974. So this is a really special year for us. We're really proud to have made it to 50, especially since we tend to counter big corporations quite a lot. And it's also motivating because, especially with issues like carbon capture and sequestration, we've got at least 50 more years of work left to do. So thank you again so much for being here today.
Well, my question was, you're not professionally involved with this stuff.
I am, yes. I work for Citizens Action Coalition, yes. I'm the Director of Development.
You're the one who do the drilling and all that?
Oh, so we are not a company that is doing CCS. We are an organization that fights to stop it as best as we can.
That's what I wanted to know.
Yes, so yeah, we are on your side. And we advocate for Hoosier consumers and our environment really in three main ways. And one of those ways is through regulatory. So with issues like CCS or carbon capture and sequestration, companies that want to do it have to navigate some regulations to do so. So at the state and potentially definitely the federal level, like the Environmental Protection Agency. So we do what we can to advocate for communities and environment our environment in the regulatory realm. But we also work to stick up for the people of the state, the air we breathe and the water we drink at the Indiana State House. As you'll learn today, companies like BP have pushed legislation through the Indiana General Assembly that is kind of creating a framework for carbon capture and sequestration here in Indiana. And Kerwin will talk more about that, but our executive director, Kerwin, has a tough job because he's down there at the State House making sure that our legislators hear how proposed bills will impact communities and our environment. And the last way in which we really advocate for our goals is by educating and organizing communities across the state. So a lot of times this information about issues that will impact your quality of life, it's not very easy to access all the time. Maybe the papers don't cover it, or if they do, it's behind a paywall. So we try to make that information available through our website, through emails, through social media, so that folks can be aware of what's going on. And we also have our organizer, Bryce, here today. He works with communities across Indiana to kind of bring folks together so that we can push back against some of these big companies. And in the CCS realm, he's been very busy outside of Terre Haute for a project that's been pushed forward there. So I will kick it to Kerwin here. He's got a great presentation. He's our executive director. He's been on our team for nearly 20 years, and he's been fighting CCS since the first murmurings of legislation that had enabled it back in 2011. And after he's done presenting, we're going to open it for a question and answer session. So as questions come to you throughout his presentation, please hold them because we'll get to them all at the end. Okay? And thank you again so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. Thanks, everyone, for coming. As Kelly said, I'm Kerwin Olson, Executive Director at Citizens Action Coalition. I've been with CAC since 2005, so almost 20 years, and I've spent the better part of 18 of those years down at the Indiana State House. And as Kelly mentioned, been working on CCS for a long time. Matter of fact, when I was first brought on full-time at CAC back in 2006. I was part-time in 2005. One of the main tasks, if not the main task I was given, was related to carbon capture and storage, and that was the connection between the Edwardsport integrated gasification combined cycle plant. So CCS has been something we've been looking at, working on, and opposing for almost 20 years now. Just put this up as a starting point, just so we can understand where we are at today. This is a map that we have on our website. It's already outdated because there's two other projects we need to add to this that have surfaced since we put this map together, but it is exploding across the state like nobody's business. There are at least 11 projects that we're aware of that are in some stage of development, and I'm sure there are more than that in some stage of development based on everything we're hearing. The biggest of those projects is the proposed Crossroads, the BP Crossroads project coming out of their Whiting refinery, where they've gotten significant funding from the feds, both for carbon capture and storage, as well as for hydrogen. Folks may have heard about the Mach H2 hydrogen hub. That's BP and their Whiting refinery, and the idea that they're going to make hydrogen, capture all of the carbon, send all of that carbon to Benton County, White County, Newton County, Jasper County, I might be forgetting one or two, with a network of 100-mile pipeline network coming out of Whiting. So we'll have pipelines carrying hazardous CO2 all across Northwest Indiana, and that's just BP. That doesn't include everything else going on. Enormous interest from the ethanol industry for carbon capture and storage. So we're seeing there's already ethanol plants with permits on file at the EPA. Poet, Valero, other ethanol companies are extremely interested in CCS and have been working on CCS in Indiana for probably close to a decade now, even if just behind the scenes to build that momentum with local, state, and federal officials. All industries, all manufacturing industries are largely engaged in this, from ethanol to steel to power generation, refineries, ammonia, you name it. Any dirty industry that emits CO2 as part of their industrial processes has a big interest in carbon capture and storage. And just to give you a sense of the scale of what we're talking about, the Crossroads project from BP is currently projecting transporting and storing 23 million tons of CO2 on an annual basis. Ethanol plants, every single ethanol plant is probably less than 1 million tons per year, but you start capturing CO2 from 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20 ethanol plants, that's a lot of CO2. And then, of course, the Wabash Valley Resources Project that has been in the news significantly at the local level, state level, and the national level. That's the project in West Terre Haute, Indiana. We'll talk a little bit about all of this stuff as we move forward. But just wanted to sort of start with this somewhat daunting map of what we know today, understanding there's a lot more projects being discussed, developed, and considered. Just quickly, what is carbon capture and storage? I guess the first thing I'll point out is you can call it carbon capture and sequestration, with sequestration being the idea of permanent geological storage, meaning they don't intend to ever extract that and reuse that. Carbon capture and storage implies the CO2 being stored for future use, potentially being extracted for enhanced oil recovery. We understand pumping CO2 into oil wells, gas wells can extract more CO2. We could also use that CO2 to make gases and other things for industrial processes. So it's carbon capture and sequestration, carbon capture and storage, and some people do say CCUS, or carbon capture utilization and storage, meaning that you're utilizing the captured CO2 for industrial purposes before putting it underground. You basically have a manufacturing facility, a power plant, a polluter that rather than emitting the CO2 out of that smokestack, they capture that CO2. It appears the cheapest way to do that is post-combustion, meaning separating it from the flue gases, although there are other ways to separate the CO2. They capture that CO2, they compress it into a supercritical state, sort of a gas, sort of a liquid, it wants to be a gas, so it's a volatile sort of mix of trying to decide what it wants to do. They stick that in a pipeline, could be a short little pipeline on site, burying it on site, as opposed to the ethanol providers are looking at doing, or it could be a hundreds of miles of CO2 pipeline that you want to deliver to an endpoint to store it for future use, or in some cases you can put the compressed CO2 on barges, on boats, if you have that capability. I was supposed to do the, yes, I was supposed to do that.
Requested that you would do finger guns.
What are the risks of CCS? Well, CAC and many others believe there are enormous risks with CCS. It's highly hazardous upon release. CO2 is heavier than oxygen, displaces oxygen in the air, causes asphyxiation of humans, of animals, whether that's seeping through the pore space surface, whether that's pipeline leaks and ruptures, as the well-publicized Sarkeesian, Mississippi leak from a couple years ago, where a pipeline burst down in Yazoo County, Mississippi, and there's plenty of stories out there about that pipeline leak that you can look up, where the sheriff said it looked like people were walking zombies with foam coming out of their mouths. Emergency vehicles couldn't get there because guess what? Internal combustion engines need oxygen in order to run. So much CO2 in the air, there's no oxygen. Cars don't start, fire trucks don't start, ambulances don't start. These threats are real, and just earlier this year, there was another pipeline leak and rupture down in Sulphur, Louisiana. So this stuff has happened, will continue to happen. CO2 can migrate. You know, they stick the CO2 underground and they expect it to stay in this defined pore space with a capstone, but we know that CO2 can migrate into areas where it's not supposed to go, contaminating our water, creating carbonic acid potentially. And of course, there's this other significant concern of a stimulation of seismic activity from supercritical CO2. We know the U.S. Geological Survey acknowledges that the disposal of waste fluids from hydrofracking is causing earthquake activities, whether it's Ohio, Pennsylvania, Oklahoma. That's on the U.S. Geological Survey website. They acknowledge that the disposal of those waste fluids underground is causing seismic activity, and we know the same is true of supercritical CO2 going into pore space. Injection and storage risks. Just to preface this, CAC works with geologists, geophysicists, chemists, engineers, and others, and they share a lot of these concerns with us. Technically, there's no room. They talk about this pore space, this open pore space, all these volumes of space that we can inject this CO2, but most of that pore space has what? Brine. Brine. Salt water. That supercritical CO2 wants to move, it's going to push. It's going to push that brine somewhere, that salt water somewhere. There's lots of concerns from some farmers we've talked to and some engineers about that brine coming up the surface, ruining prime agricultural land. And that's one thing that West Central and Northwest Indiana is blessed with, is prime agricultural land. So the idea that we're going to be disposing potentially tens, if not hundreds of millions of supercritical CO2 across all of the counties in West Central Indiana, Northwest Indiana, understanding the risks, we think is insane. Forcing CO2 into formation pressurizes that storage zone. This is a highly pressurized liquid gas supercritical sort of element that's injected and transported at about 2100 psi, stays pressurized in that pore space. So you have this constant pressurization going on with this supercritical CO2 that wants to go to the surface. It wants to migrate. It wants to move. This stuff wants to go somewhere. Lateral plumes form outward because it wants to relieve that pressure, so it's going to go. It's going to go somewhere. And any fissures in those rock formations, in that containment zone, fractures, faults, fissures, it's going to move through that stuff. Again, not only migrating potentially to the surface, potentially into drinking water sources, but it's also going to stimulate seismic activity. We know, we've gotten calls from a couple of chemists over the last couple of weeks, very concerned about the threat of carbonic acid. Supercritical CO2 combines with water, what do you get? Carbonic acid, not good. Furthermore, that carbonic acid, according to some of the folks we've talked to, that will corrode all of those steel fittings, all of that steel pipe, and over time, that's only going to get worse. So all of those pipings that BP and others will show you their diagrams and everything's great, nothing to see here, you know? Nothing to see here, folks. Just think about that supercritical CO2 migrating under pressure, moving, doing its thing year after year after year after year amidst all of these pipe fittings and seals and other things. There's real risk. And then, of course, that pressurized CO2 also subjects those containment zones to potential, other fractures from just overpressurizing. So these risks are real, they aren't imagined, and CAC and others should be very, very concerned. We'll talk about this a little bit more later, but this was the first Class 6 permit. Class 6 permits are the permits for the disposal of CO2. The Decatur, Illinois project, ADM, Archer Daniel Midland's ethanol plant. This was earlier this week. The first project to get off the ground. All of us, those fighting CCS, have been told that we're fear-mongering, we're scaring people. None of this is true. And the very first project, the EPA has said they violated their water permit. That supercritical CO2 has migrated into unauthorized zones and areas of formations where it wasn't supposed to go. That just happened. You can Google that and you'll find all kinds of articles coming out of Illinois related to what. And before that, the U.S. Geological Survey doing seismic monitoring at the ADM plant. And this was from a couple years ago. Detected over 4,700 microquakes from that project, which they'll dismiss, saying microquakes happen all the time. Not a big deal, but 4,700 microquakes that they've registered from that ADM project in Illinois. Now we're going to talk about a little bit about the policy. I've been doing this a long time, so I can stand up here for hours, so I'm trying to compress this and share what I think is the most important background. But at the federal level, it's the EPA primarily that in most states oversees the Class 6 injection permits. In order to do a carbon capture CCS project, well, not the capture side of things, but the injection, sequestration, storage, you need what is known as a Class 6 permit. Class 6 permits were created in 2010 during the Obama administration when CCS was really starting to elevate itself in terms of the conversation. PHMSA, the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, oversees interstate pipelines. That's important to understand. PHMSA has authority over interstate pipelines, meaning pipelines that cross state lines and go into other states. However, because of what happened down in Mississippi, the Sartesia project, there's a really fascinating report, really long report out there that's very easy to find from PHMSA and Congress on that. Lots of things went wrong. But they proposed updating the rules around hazardous CO2 pipelines. That has not happened yet. They apparently sent some sort of proposed updated rule to OMB, Office of Management and Budget, back in February, I believe. That's sitting there somewhere. We're all anxiously awaiting sort of a public comment period, a hearing period on that, but that's still sitting there. That's part of why Governor Pritzker in Illinois put a 2-year moratorium on CCS projects, because we don't have updated federal rules yet. We'll get to state rules in a minute, but we don't have federal rules yet, updated federal rules governing the health and safety standards around CO2 pipelines. What is motivating this enormous build-out and interest? Primarily the Section 45Q tax credit, but also to a lesser extent the 45V tax credit. The Section 45Q tax credit is the money you get for capturing and sequestering, storing CO2 underground. It is an absolute gold mine bonanza. Make no mistake about it. CCS is 100% all about wealth creation. Not about climate, not about health and safety, not about the public good. It is about wealth creation, which the state of Indiana acknowledged at a summer study committee back in 2009 at the State House. Somebody asked, I don't get it, what's this CCS stuff all about? Governor Daniels' energy advisor said, wealth creation. Jigar Shah with DOE, the head of the LPO department, loan program department, said to the New York Times, we are going to create more wealth than could ever be imagined, or whatever that quote was. So this is about wealth creation, $85 per ton of CO2 that you permanently sequester. Do the math. Do the math on 23 million tons at $85 every year. Some background on 45Q. First of all, background on federal policy. CCS, the idea of CCS first surfaced in 2005, Energy and Policy Act from the George W. Bush administration, where we first created regional CCS partnerships to talk about this stuff. Created the Center for Coal Technology Research at Purdue. That's where it first surfaced. 2008, again under George W. Bush administration, that created the Section 45Q tax credit at a much smaller amount. 45Q tax credit was expanded in 2018 under the Trump administration to $50 per ton. Still not enough to motivate most folks, a few folks, but not most folks. And then the Inflationary Reduction Act, the IRA, supersized that tax credit to $85 per ton. And that is what has motivated all of this activity around CCS. Furthermore, under the IRA, you can now get direct pay rather than just a tax write-off or a tax credit. You can get cash. You can flat out get cash for up to 5 years, or the whole 12-year life cycle of the project. You can sell those carbon credits, those tax credits, for 12 years to a third party, so they can claim carbon credits for part of whatever they need those carbon credits for. Wealth creation. 45V is a tax credit for the production of quote-unquote clean hydrogen, whatever that means. They still really haven't defined that. And there's enormous funding, loans, grants for CCS, R&D, projects, other things, just alone here in Indiana. The big announcement this week was from Wabash Valley Resources, who have been waiting for this federal loan guarantee in order to begin their project. They were just given a $1.559 billion loan guarantee, courtesy of American taxpayers, in addition to $44 million that they received in grants over years. Duke Energy was given $8.2 million from the feds for a front-end engineering design study at their Edwardsport integrated gasification combined cycle to explore the capture side of things, even though they already explored that almost 20 years ago, figured out they couldn't do it. Now somehow they're thinking again about doing it. Heidelberg, the cement plant down in Lawrence County in Bedford, received about $5 million for the same thing, front-end engineering design study on the capture part of it. You got to capture it before you can store it. And then our friends at BP got nearly a $100 million grant for their Project Crossroads. And there are billions and billions and billions of dollars at the taking for these projects. I'm going to talk a couple slides here about CCS legislation in Indiana. The next slide covers it more completely, but we generally have 5 bills that in some shape or form have touched carbon capture and storage in Indiana. Senate Roll Act 251, a massive energy bill that dealt with a lot of things, but it was in 2011 that the state of Indiana, the Indiana legislature, granted private corporations the right of eminent domain for for CO2 pipelines. So that's been around for a long time. Senate rolled Act 442 in 2019. That was a specific bill, or a bill specific to Wabash Valley Resources to create this quote-unquote pilot project. We had the idea that, okay, let's dip our toe in and do this pilot project in West Terre Haute, Indiana. Even got that bill narrowed down to just that address in West Terre Haute. As we know now, that pretty much the floodgates have opened. We didn't take our time to have a pilot project and study this stuff. Furthermore, as part of Senate Roll Act 442, part of the deal with that bill was supposed to be we were going to have some study committees on CCS at the State House. That was something CAC brought up. You know, maybe a study might be a good idea. So the bill left, signed by the governor, as a study committee. Guess what? Study committee never happened. So the premise of the bill was a pilot project with a study committee. Now we know that's no longer a pilot project, and who needs a study? The floodgates have opened. 1209, 2022, that pretty much eliminated the idea of a pilot project because House Enrolled Act 1209 was the bill championed by BP that effectively set a framework for the entire state of Indiana for both CO2 pipelines as well as CCS, what I like to call storage wells. We prefer to call them dumps because that's what they are. CO2 is garbage, those are dumps. But 1209 was a significant piece of legislation that opened up the entire state, and Wabash Valley Resources got themselves exempted from that bill because Wabash Valley Resources, we're not going to talk much about them today, but they play by their own sets of rules. And then the following year, in 2023, we had Senate Roll Act 451. That was specific to Wabash Valley Resources only, and specific only to Vigo and Vermilion County, even though in the state of Indiana, special legislation is illegal, unconstitutional. But somehow they pass a bill just for Wabash Valley Resources that it only affects those two counties and those two court systems. And then in 2023, this is what appears to be a very minor bill, but DNR needed authority to begin a rulemaking for CO2 pipelines and CCS storage wells, so passed this bill to give DNR that authority. And taken collectively, this is what those bills have created. Number one, again, private operators can use eminent domain for CO2 pipelines. They've had that in statute since 2011. Private operators can dump CO2 under your property without all landowners consenting to that. And again, that consent is based on acreage, not parcels. So you can have somebody that might own 70% of the property where they want to dump. As long as they get approval from 70% of surface area, they're good to go, and the other property owners have no say. DNR can issue the permit. For Wabash Valley, it's even lower, 60%.
That's 70%, just I want to get a clarification.
70%.
7, thank you.
For everybody other than Wabash Valley Resources. Those bills effectively transfer the long-term liability of those CO2 wells to the state of Indiana taxpayers. Once those projects close, get a certificate of completion, whatever that means, 12 years, 15 years, 20 years, it's still unclear when a project is closed. Guess who picks up the tab for continued operations, continued monitoring, continued maintenance, long-term liability? Taxpayers of the state of Indiana. Got federal taxpayers on the hook through these grant monies, through these loan guarantees, state taxpayers on the hooks for the long-term liability for those projects. Those bills effectively shift the burden of proof to property owners. Say you wake up one day, head of cattle, keeled over in the back 40. The burden of proof that head of cattle was harmed by CO2 migrating to the surface falls on the property owner. Whether it's harm to human, harm to animals, harm to property, that burden of proof falls on the property owner. Because all property owners have plenty of money for oil and gas lawyers, hydrogeologists, and other things to make these claims. So CAC's been saying for a long time it effectively immunizes the industry. Boy, do they get mad at us. They say we are misrepresented. You can still sue. You're misrepresented. No, we're not. The burden of proof falls on the public to establish that that harm was caused by that project. Getting back to interstate versus intrastate, it is still unclear in Indiana. First of all, there are no state rules yet. We have no state administrative rules for CO2 pipelines, whether it's the installation, the construction, the maintenance, how far they have to be dug, how far away from this structure, that, whatever the case may be. We have no state rules governing CO2 pipelines or CO2 storage wells. It's a little bit unclear. It looks like that authority is going to be at DNR, but the IORC does have a pipeline division that oversees interstate pipelines as well. Unclear how that's going to come about. And also, there has been a super secret working group. It's not so super secret because we all know about it, but there's been a super secret industry-only working group at DNR now for quite some time, writing these rules before they will be shared with the public for a comment period, basically to fix it. The industry's writing the rule behind the scenes. That rule will then get propagated and posted for public comment. So, underscoring, of course, which everybody in this room knows, the absolute need for transparency, which the reality is, there is none. So again, no federal rules on this stuff, no state rules on this stuff, and folks should know, General Assembly has passed law that basically declares this stuff to be in the public interest. First, in 2011, in Senate Rule Act 251, the use of carbon dioxide transmission pipelines, including their routing, construction, maintenance, and operation. And then added, in 2019, through Senate Rule Act 442, they added the underground storage of carbon dioxide. So CO2 pipelines and the underground storage of CO2 are declared as a matter of legislative determination, even though they never studied it, they never took a look at it, to be a public use and service in the public interest and a benefit to the welfare and people of Indiana. Getting back to Class 6 permits. In order to do carbon capture and storage, you got to have a Class 6 permit. Currently, the EPA oversees those injection permits in 47 states. The EPA has only issued they issued some that are projects that never happened, but 4 EPA permitted dumps in the country. 2 of those, the project we just talked about, ADM Decatur, Illinois, has 2 permits, and the other 2 is Wabash Valley Resources, right here in West Terre Haute, Indiana, where the EPA approved construction permits for 1 injection point in Vigo County and 1 injection point in Vermilion County. So that's it. Those are the only Class 6 permits issued by the Environmental Protection Agency, despite what the industry may tell you, with their charts and graphs of all these tens of thousands of permits that have been issued. Wasn't for supercritical CO2. There are 3 states that have primacy over the EPA, meaning the state can issue those Class 6 permits. And at the moment, those are North Dakota, Wyoming, Louisiana. North Dakota has issued 8. Wyoming's issued 3. So there have been Class 6 permits issued by other states, and there's rumors of potential legislation at Indiana, with Indiana potentially seeking primacy over those applications. Whether that happens or not, I don't know. There are 8 states with primacy applications pending at the EPA for different levels of primacy.
Question for you, IBEX been drilling and stuff, so are they doing that on state permits?
I'm sorry, who has?
IBEX, they've been doing test drills and...
Those are probably stratigraphic test wells or seismic test wells or something along those lines. But those would not be a Class 6 permit.
Yeah, we were told that Valero Linden got a permit to start putting a well.
hasn't been issued yet. They might have got a permit, we'll talk about that in a minute.
Okay.
They might have got a permit for a test well.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, thank you. Sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
Clarification.
And at EPA, there's currently 149 applications, 53 projects under review, because projects will have multiple injection sites, or maybe just one. And we have 4 pending in Indiana right now at the EPA, one in Randolph County, one in Montgomery County, one in Madison County, one in Wabash County. And these were the 2 new projects that we don't yet have on our map. Those are the POET projects in North Manchester and Alexandria. There are 4 pending EPA Class 6 permit applications. As part of that process, there will be a comment period. There will be a public hearing at some point. When that happens, I can't say. But there is a process involved before they issue those permits. But as we learned with Wabash Valley Resources, generally they write the permit, they give them draft permits, and then they start the process. Again, the wheels have been greased, if you will, by the time those things are put out for not only public consumption, but also public comment and engagement. And this might be what you guys might be seeing out here. But you gotta do seismic testing, and they've gotta drill test wells. I've gotten some calls about seismic testing and what's going on with that. Folks might see these things laying around in ditches. They might see those thumper trucks out there, beating the ground to do seismic testing. One of the first steps in the process is initial seismic characterization of those areas. They got to do seismic testing before they can get what's called a stratigraphic test well permit. That's issued by Department of Natural Resources in Indy. DNR issues those permits for those test wells through the DNR. And if folks weren't aware, in White County, BP has filed at DNR for 3 test well permits, one in Benton County, one in Jasper County, and one right here in White County. And what happens with those stratigraphic test wells is that's when they do the seismic testing. If all appears safe for a test well, they drill a test well. I looked at those permits, their depths from 4,200 to 6,800 feet or so, not entirely sure. Pulls out a big core of geology and all the strata and the rocks formations. That gets sent out to that national lab for evaluation and analysis, and then that national lab produces a report on this formation looks good, this formation not so good, but that's sort of the first step in the process, is the seismic testing followed up with the test well. All goes well on that core, then that's when you move forward in the process with Class 6 applications and other things. But I found those, I was getting calls from West Terre Haute, I think it was back in 2020, about what all these little things were. There were about 3 or 4 miles of them all throughout the area around the plant. Those little boxes laying generally in the ditch. Everybody's mailboxes are along the side of the road. Nobody out there knew anything about it. Nobody. Not a single person. I walked those lines. If I saw somebody in their yard, I talked to them. I knocked on a few doors. Nobody knew anything about it. They did leave a flyer on houses, I think tucked in the flag on your mailbox or other places that some people saw, some people blew away. Bottom line is, nobody knew what was going on, and we got a few calls. And then we're just going to end here where we started. This is what the state of Indiana looks like right now, at least what we know. Again, BP has not submitted their Class 6 application. They just submitted applications for their test well. I think, thinking back to Wabash Valley, I want to say it was about 2 years in between that test well permit and the Class 6 application, roughly that sort of time frame. But I know the powers that be in Washington, D.C., who serve the interest of the oil industry, are trying to speed up that whole permitting process because of this influx of applications and workload. So they're working hard in D.C. not to protect us, but rather to expedite this process and make sure these permits go out the door quicker rather than slower, because got to create that wealth. Oh, Kelly's gone. And then that's it. That's thank you. This is just one of my favorite editorial cartoons of ever, from way back in the day in 2007, when CCS had just become a thing. Tom Tolles at the Washington Post. There was lots of talk back then, Future Gen, Thoroughbred, Edwardsport, and he just had a thing, his early method of carbon sequestration that we actually know would work, and leave the coal around. Anyway, that was funny back in the day, still funny to me today. That's what we got. Happy to have a discussion, answer questions, or whatever the group pleases. So we appreciate you coming, and thank you for your time.
I haven't got my monthly check in the mail yet.
You'll be waiting. You'll be waiting.
You know, we covered a lot of ground in a short amount of time. You know, state rules, federal rules, anything come to mind about those?
In White County, where is the permit, does it have any location that is designated to be part of the permit area?
We know the locations through we were able to map it. It's got latitude, longitude on it. I don't have that on me, but
One
yeah.
here in Golden Township. I mean, it's
It's right here somewhere.
yeah, it's 600 yards from where we're
It's
from.
very close to here.
600 yards from where we're from the neighbors. So what is that?
And again, that's
Do you know where the E is?
that's the test well,
Yes.
you know, and the actual injection wells for Wabash Valley are nowhere near where they did the test well, which is part of the problem. They characterize the geology in one place, and then you go, we're just gonna put a 12-mile well here. So, that doesn't necessarily mean that's the injection point. That just means that's the area they chose to do the test well.
But this just shows you, the Bible tells you in the end days, man will not want to drink the water, but he'll have to.
Yes, that's
Yeah,
right.
that's it. This is all coming, you know it's coming.
I find it kind of hard for me that has done, as a citizen of White County, that really has done very little to maybe educate myself about or respond to this present danger that you're talking about. To say very much that might be deemed as critical of you and what you're doing, or your organization and what you're doing. But is there pamphlets, information that you can pass out among the citizenry that like are here? That
We didn't print anything. We do have information on our website. We do have some fact sheets.
it would seem like it would really be helpful. I mean, it's really helpful when you'd be here today, letting us know. And
Yep, if folks can sign up, we can put you on the email list, and we can create an email list for this group.
Train,
and
trainer,
stuff.
so to speak, you know, so we walk out of here and then we can share all this information.
Yeah, yep.
the other thing is, it seems to me like you ought to be talking about people supporting your endeavor with money.
Well, we're a little bit humble, so I do appreciate that, but we are,
I'm not humble.
yeah, we are,
I should be, but we're not.
right, a fair amount of our funding comes from our members and supporters. Our average contribution is what, about $35 a year? So we're supported by Hoosiers like you know, with an average contribution of $35. So yeah, go to our website, top of the right says donate now, and every little bit counts, because that's why we're here today. Yeah, funded by folks like you, so.
It just seems like, again, I hesitate to act like I know more about your enterprise and what you're doing than you do, but it sure seems to me like you ought to have a chapter here that says, hey, here's where you send your check in to
Yep.
do what already be done for yourself.
Well, this shows we are more interested in educating and speaking and getting the word out than we are. Maybe we're lousy at fundraising, but yeah, we need your support. Yeah.
Well, it sounds to me like you better get better.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we've been here 50 years, so we're doing all right.
I'm gonna stick up for us here. I'm gonna say that we all cut our teeth, and I'm being funny, I'm being funny, cut our teeth.
I am trying to be,
Knocking on doors and making phone calls. Kerwin started off as a phone canvasser. Bryce and I were field canvasser, so we knock on doors across the state, but things have changed for us since 2020. And I feel like we're still learning how to ask for those contributions without knocking on people's doors or calling them. So
You work for the state,
No,
you just a,
we're, yeah, a nonprofit.
we're a 501c4, independent
Organization.
nonprofit.
just a,
Yeah, just a group.
okay.
and I think these people, you're asking big questions of them. And I have some background about the organization from a long time ago, but it's gone silent.
Well, we stopped knocking on doors after COVID. We used to be those pesky little hippie kids with the clipboards that ring your doorbell and eat dinner.
I remember Jim Johns.
Yeah, and Jim on his bike. Yep, Jim's one of our founding fathers. So we were already struggling at the doors in terms of getting contributions, meaning our field canvassers actually raised more money in the 90s and 2000s than they did in the 2010s. Some of that's economic. People stopped answering their door. Then COVID hit, and so we had to stop door knocking for a while. So we still make calls, and now we're sort of shifting to sort of this, for better or worse, this new digital reality we're doing that. So
This is costing billions and billions of dollars. We can fill 55-gallon drums, fly them over to Russia and drop them.
I just wanted to say two quick things, mostly in response to what you said, sir. Well, first of all, my name is Gabriel. I work at Indiana University at the Center for Rural Engagement, and we have been working on a project trying to think about giving rural communities in Indiana the chance to really think about carbon capture in a more critical way, because often the way that it's presented by industry is only sort of the positives, and I want people to be able to get a more complete picture to have better conversations. And so the two things I wanted to share was, one, on one hand, carbon capture is very complicated, and so it's easy to feel like I'll never know enough to say what I think. And I want to suggest that there's always more to learn, but trust your gut, trust your instincts, and yes, we can keep learning, but don't let the fact that it is a very complicated thing make you feel like you don't have a voice or a perspective that's valuable, because it is. And I think there's a tendency for people who are very much in support of this to say, it's very, very complicated, you don't have to understand it, let me just reassure you. And your perspective is valuable, even if you're not an expert working for the industry who knows all the science. And the second thing was, the work that I'm doing around the state, I want to find community members who are curious about this, who want to help their neighbors understand it better. And so for those of you who would be interested in thinking about, similar to what was said, the sort of train the trainer, if folks are interested in learning a little bit more about this and potentially getting some support to bring some neighbors together to talk with them about what's happening, come and find me afterwards, and I'll take your email address down, and we can start educating our neighbors about this so that we have a more complete picture about what the situation is. I want your cards too, so find me. I'll stick around here for a while after we're done.
yeah, because part of the process here, especially with federal funding and federal loan guarantees, is the community benefit agreement that these companies are supposed to be talking with the community about, negotiating with these agreements, and on the one hand, I know, speaking for a lot of folks in West Terre Haute, they see a community benefits agreement sort of as acquiescence, accepting the project and signing the dotted line and all is good. But on the other hand, there can be some benefits brought to communities from those. So those are important things to think about as this project moves forward. So. I saw 4 hands go up.
Has any of these projects ever been stopped across the United States since or does money push them all through?
Oh, many of them have been stopped. The conversation in Indiana started because of 2 projects. The Edwardsport IGCC, which Duke Energy effectively told the public this will be the cleanest coal plant ever built, and we're going to capture CO2, store it under the ground, life will be great. CAC was out there going, Duke Energy is greenwashing. This is a lie. This is not true, and they will not capture 1 single drop of CO2 from the Edwardsport power plant. And what we have today is the Edwardsport power plant not capturing 1 single drop of CO2, and what got that project so much public support was this false notion that CCS was going to occur. And then, some folks may remember the failed Indiana gasification substitute natural gas proposal down in Rockport, Indiana, the SNG, Lucania Company, that went on for 7 or 8 years. They were going to build a massive pipeline from southwest Indiana and Rockport all the way down to the oil fields in Mississippi, capturing all that carbon. They were going to capture that carbon from Edwardsport, from FutureGen in Mattoon, Illinois, from Thoroughbred in Kentucky, from Edwardsport. And so all of these projects have failed. Matter of fact, the congressional report showed that the funding of CCS from the 2009 bill was one of the biggest failures, boondoggles, and wastes of billions and billions of dollars that the agency had never seen. So what did we do in the IRA? We doubled it. Why not? The feds acknowledged it was a total and complete failure. And here we are again, pouring billions and billions of dollars into this, as well as shifting financial liability, environmental liability, public health liability onto the backs of local communities, property owners, and citizens. And again, the very first project has already had issues with seismic activity, with migration of fluids. So yeah, go ahead.
Oh, well, when she said how many of these get stopped, I'm kind of confused because you keep saying failure. So when you say failure, do you mean that it didn't turn out to be what it is? And when she says stop, I'm assuming, do you mean we were able to stop?
Well, I'll clarify. I guess in order to inject CO2, you need CO2. So it starts with the capture process. There's 3 processes here. First, you got to capture it. You got to separate that. That has proven to be incredibly expensive, incredibly energy intensive, enormously energy intensive. So the economics and the engineering and the power needs, it has been unable to make that math pencil out. It's just too darn expensive. And so in order to make that math pencil out, they just kept creeping up that Section 45Q tax credit so that the economics make sense. But they still have the problem of the front end in terms of effectively capturing CO2, compressing that, and getting it underground. So that's what I sort of meant by these projects having failure. That's one reason they're looking at ethanol. Because ethanol plants are almost a pure stream of CO2, correct me if I'm wrong. So much easier to sort of economical to do that.
And I think speaking to also like public engagement, stopping CCS pipelines in other states, which we've seen a lot of engagement in Illinois and just west of.
Because our pushback doing anything, I guess.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
But it's, yeah, each state's a little different because everybody's got different rules, but I mean, Illinois stopped that big one recently, if I'm not mistaken. And
Yeah.
So I'd like to say, we've got, what is it, Mason City,
It's
Iowa?
Mason City, Iowa. It was a warehouse we were dealing with, personal funds with one people that were managers.
So this is just proof that it can be stopped. I will stop. Because they were talking about having pipeline, CO2, same thing. They completely stop. It's not like, basically we have to have people in the state house and locally who are willing to stand up. But if we get that, it Canby, 100%.
Yeah, those projects in the upper Midwest, those are completely insane. They're talking about 2,200, 2,600, 2,800 miles of pipelines traversing Minnesota, Illinois, Iowa, the Dakotas, Nebraska, all going to injection points north of thousands and thousands of miles of CO2 pipelines through dozens and dozens of communities.
I just add a piece to that, which is that it's very expensive to build facilities to inject CO2 underground. So when a company does that, they want to build pipelines so they can collect CO2 from a great distance. And it is, and the pipelines are often one of the more vulnerable and risky parts of this whole process. And in addition to that, they're tremendously expensive because these are supercritical fluids. Which I don't really understand what that means. It's a liquid, it's a gas, but it's high pressure, it's corrosive, and that means that these pipelines can cost millions of dollars per mile and still not be particularly safe. So yeah, I wanted to add those.
Well, look how long it took to get the oil pipeline over in Alaska. Although it took years and years and years and years. Well, got it.
According to people in the business we've talked to, yeah, they've got to line these pipes. These are not oil and gas pipelines. Much more corrosive, need far more protection.
So tonight I can sleep okay.
For now, sure, yes, yes.
Stay awake.
In the last meeting that we were having in Hammond, a lot of people are asking, from a legal standpoint, or does this community have to stop them? One, you guys, I'm from Lake County, up Hammond, Pestle, my area. You can't stop these people, but you gotta get on your local administrators, county government, and call Pester. Keep on their butts. Don't let them ease up, don't let them talk you out of it, because somewhere along the line, they're getting some too. So it's all about, like my wife always says,
It's
follow the money trail. So get on your local government and tell them you don't want it. Because if you want to end up just like my home, Pestville, if you want to end up like a mountain mine, just keep going the direction you're going. Don't say anything, and just let them do what they want. If you want to save your community, stop them. Talk to your people in the diners. Go to the churches, everywhere. You guys are a smaller community. You guys are more close than the people in. I don't know my next door neighbor. You guys do. Keep on your local government, and you can slow down. If you make it painful for them, they'll back off.
Yeah, it's all about organizing. It's all about educating local communities, empowering local communities to talk with their local elected officials. It's all about, to seal your line, sir, it's all about supporting groups working at the state level. There are groups working at the State House, working at the IURC, working at DNR, and then it's all of us plugging in with regional and national groups who are also working on these issues to collectively put pressure on, continue pressure on local officials, state officials, federal officials, regional officials. It's a network, and it is growing and growing. We've connected with hundreds and hundreds of people in the last 12 months because of this stuff, and it's keeping that dialogue going. It can be overwhelming. It can absolutely be overwhelming. And you can get lost in a little bit of a rabbit hole, so always remember to take some personal time.
I heard of a group, a whole busload of people going to the State House concerning this, and the officials, our politicians, would not hear that. It did no good.
You're talking about the rally at State House this year, yeah. Yeah, that was sort of a dud.
We don't even get a good response from county officials.
Right, right? That's why you gotta stay on them.
There's a solution.
And don't give up. Don't give up. They need resistance.
It'll be hard.
We need to be resistant.
And work together.
Yeah.
Gotta keep going.
Yeah.
Two questions. One, how many local officials from White County are here today?
None, but you have two candidates. You have, we have candidates for commissioner and for the county council here today, so.
I mean, sitting officials. And the second part,
Is there money to be made on White County?
White County will get all this.
Well, yeah, I mean, White County will, the counties where these projects are located will, you know, realize some tax revenues unless they get property. What's
White
that?
County sold us out on solar, they sold us out on wind farms, they'll sell us out on this. They don't care what we have to say.
That's why you gotta keep going. I hear you. I understand.
It's sad.
I come from a background where, we had to know about CO2. Okay, we took classes in it, okay, and it's not, I'm not a chemist or anything like that, I worked in a restaurant, okay? Every restaurant in the United States has one of these big solar tanks outside that a truck comes by and fills it with liquid CO2 almost every month, okay? That's 400 pounds of liquid CO2. All right, there's 750,000 restaurants in the U.S. Multiply that by 400 pounds of CO2 every month. Okay, that adds up to quite a bit.
What do you do with the CO2 that you get?
You drink it in your pot.
But is this the same CO2 that they're?
No, because your body knows how to handle it, low amounts. But let me give you an example, okay? The air that we're breathing right now, the level of CO2 is roughly around 400 parts per million. If you have more people in the room, this could be a little bit higher. But say, for example, the 400 parts per million is the size of that projector on that table right there. Okay, toxicity gets in about 4,000 parts per million, or about the size of that piano over there, in this room, okay? So, it can get really bad really quick. We were all here the other day when we woke up in the morning, there's fog laying around. That means there's no air movement whatsoever. If CO2 is coming up through the air, through a fissure, through a bad valve, or whatever, it is going to just sit at ground level and spread, okay? In the restaurant that I used to work for, we were required, every place we had a CO2 tank, we had to have a CO2 monitor alarm that would go off if the CO2 level got above 600 parts per million, okay? So that's the minute little pieces of CO2 that we're talking about that can be hazardous to us. We're near the New Madrid Fault. Okay, we haven't had a major earthquake here, according to seismologists, for thousands of years, but we're way overdue. So if they do sequester the CO2 underground someplace, and it opens up a fault or opens up the vault that the CO2 is supposed to be in, what's going to happen to us? That's what scares me. Now, I'm not convinced that CO2 is that big of a problem. CO2 has been around as long as the Earth has been around, and it has had concentrations higher, it has had concentrations lower, but the Earth can handle it. That's why every plant uses CO2. Every tree, every blade of grass, every little bit of seaweed that's in the ocean will use the CO2. So, I'm not seeing that big of a problem with, the CO2 that they're putting out, because the Earth has been able to handle it for 100 years, a couple hundred years, when, manufacturing and oil production and all this really took off. Is there global warming? They changed it, they said, well, it's not global warming anymore, it's global climate change. Well, the climate has been changing ever since man's been on the Earth, a long time before, as the dinosaurs were still here.
Do you think the people in Mississippi and Louisiana have the same opinion, the ones that had to deal with the brakes and the CO2 taking all their oxygen, shutting their vehicles off, not allowing emergency people to come in and help them, and they didn't know what was going on?
Well,
They literally sucked the air out.
You're misinterpreting what I'm saying. I'm saying we don't need to capture the CO2 because the Earth is handling it.
Right.
I think it's a waste of time and money.
I apologize.
That's okay.
Well,
Even shoot.
what you just said has created a very interesting coalition. CAC believes strongly that climate change is an existential threat. We believe very strongly we need to leave fossil fuels in the ground. But we also believe that CCS will cause an increase in CO2 emissions, is not a solution to climate change. And you need look no further than who is the CCS coalition? Who are these folks? Chevron, Exxon, Mobil, BP, oil and gas are the ones pushing CCS for the purposes of continuing their operations and making even more money than they already make. And then, if you do not necessarily accept climate science, you're like, why are we capturing this stuff in the first place? So you have this interesting alliance on the right and the left on CCS. It gets muddy when we start talking about other things. But when it comes to CCS, as long as we stay on point, stay in that lane, we agree.
And it's those types of unified coalitions that have stopped projects across the Midwest. It's people who might disagree on certain things, but we can come together and stay focused on protecting in this situation.
But the way the law is now, they can come down and take your farm, you got nothing to say about it.
Pretty much. You're supposed to be fairly compensated pursuant to
Yeah, right.
that statutory language.
So if you have people, say the DNR escort for BP and whatever, onto your farmland, do they have any rights? Get off the land. Is there anything they can do, even if it's a DNR? I mean, they're not the super police, they're not God. There's got to be something that they can do, get off the land.
Well, there's language in there about entering a person's property for these purposes. So no, they cannot just enter your property and do whatever they want to do.
So you notice it coming tomorrow, and nothing you can do about it.
Yeah.
All the
But
other,
they do have the authority to basically utilize your property for purposes of pipelines or for purposes of sequestering without your consent.
Well, and I think I've read I don't profess to be a lawyer, but I think I've read the bill correctly. From my understanding, though, if you try to get a court order or injunction to stop this, judges aren't even allowed to issue an injunction against any action that they're taking. Which, to me, is like, why would be another benefit for BP and they would push through?
I mean, we'll see. I'm sure there's going to be at some point property owners that are going to sue. So everything's defined by judicial outcomes. You know, and you ask, and believe me, I have, you ask 4 lawyers to interpret something, you're going to get 9 answers. So the rubber meets the road when somebody goes to file something, you get a ruling from the county court, either side's going to appeal, that's going to go to the state court. We all know how this works. So it's a matter of but the laws are written very, very favorably to the special interest, of course.
A couple of things. Can you give us a list, you kind of highlighted a little bit as far as the timeline. So from your best understanding and knowledge, where do you go as far as, you know, seismic testing, then the permit test to the DNR and Class 6 application? So is there other steps that they have to go through for these projects? Am I missing anything? Because the other question would be, what do we need to look for, you know, to know? Because, you know, you can go to the recorder's office, you see who signed leases, you know, you can go onto the DNR and see, you know, who was filed for, you know, these test well permits and stuff. What do we need to look for to know where they're at in the state? Because we don't know anything. The reason I say, I live in Cass County, and there's the Anderson Climbers has already done seismic testing. They've already gone to DNR.
Okay.
They've already been, you know, they've signed leases, you know. So where do we go for? Because if you look at, you know, what Farm Bureau had said, you know, locals can regulate where CCS projects may occur through zoning and ordinance enforcements because it's been taken out of the local hands. And so the only thing they can do is through zoning. And that hasn't happened yet. I just need to know what lines of defense? Where do we need to go from here in order to always try to at least stay, you know, a step ahead or right with them? I don't know what to.
I mean, there are two different, probably more than that, but there are two trajectories for a project. Number one, you need the policy. You know, you need the laws. They have generally, for the most part, laid that foundation. But it's difficult. That's why I said there are at least 11. I know there are more. There are far more out there. I have not recently searched DNR for test well permits, and even if you do, you've got to do a lot of work to pull up all those permits and try to figure out which one might be a test well for a CCS project. But local county council meetings, city council meetings, town council meetings, just doing everything you can to stay informed and involved. There are people in West Terre Haute that go to the recorder's office almost every week to look at land deeds and those sort of things. So, you know, it's just staying in tune with what's happening at the local level, whether that's through, of course, journalism has changed a lot. The idea of a local paper sort of no longer exists, public notices and those sort of things. So paying attention to BTA meetings, zoning meetings, county council meetings, those sort of things.
But are those the three things that you need to look out for? Is it the seismic testing, the permit test well?
Yeah, from a
Those are basically the three things that.
yeah,
There isn't anything, other steps.
other than they almost always look for local tax abatements. So at the same time, they're trying to get permits at the state level or the federal level. They're also trying to get their sweetheart deals at the local level, which has to go through the process. So it's following the abatement process, local incentive processes, those sort of things.
The EPA also maintains a website, like a dashboard of Class 6 permit applications, and they'll show you all of the different projects that are proposed and where they are in their sequence, and you'll be able to go and find the ones for Indiana, and they'll show you the handful of projects that are sort of in the pipeline, so to speak, for a Class 6 permit. And that's on the EPA's Class 6 website, and I can show it.
But how soon does it become on there if they just started the process? How soon does it get on to the
It's
EPA's?
pretty recent, but we're pretty...
But it doesn't show up on their website that they file the application, right?
No, it's like, well, I'd have to check. I mean, it does have, you know, it outlines all of the steps through to being granted the permit. So it might only start with the initial application, but yeah, that's a good question.
And the other thing I talk about, property owners, compensation, risk, that sort of thing. They use the term AOR, that's the area of review. And the AOR from our perspective is very narrowly defined in Class 6 permits. Because I think the Wabash Valley project, somebody needs fact check me on this, but I think their AOR is like a 2.3 or 2.6. Does that sound about right? Square mile of property, meaning that's the area that they're looking at with respect to the underground plume. And we know that that underground plume is going to continue to move almost in perpetuity. The more they inject, the more pressure it goes. So I've looked at some computer modeling that do all these really complicated computer modeling stuff. That's why we need a hydrogeologist and that sort of stuff to help interpret all of this information. But what was filed by ADM, for example, had one AOR that showed a 10-year sort of horizon that had like a 32.9 square mile potential AOR of migration. That's time lapse that you can sort of click through those photos. So they wanted a very small AOR to make it seem sort of less intrusive, less property owners to deal with, but understanding that that migration will continue. And what makes the Wabash Valley project even worse is that their law that they passed, they only have to notify a property owner upon the expected migration of the CO2. Why is that important? Because that means they can inject it before they tell you. It's too late. They don't have to tell property owners until upon the expected migration, and what they'll tell you is, well, we're gonna monitor this stuff closely, you know, so we'll be modeling and monitoring that, well, we know where it's going, and we'll knock on your door when we think it's headed your way. Wink, wink, nod, nod, you know.
You probably can't answer this, but I'll ask it anyway. In Terre Haute, where they've done this, what happened to the property values in that area?
Well, they haven't done it yet.
They haven't done it, well, I mean, it's.
Understand, you talk about timelines, Wabash Valley Resources started in 2016. You read some of their initial materials of the Wayback Machine, you know, on the internet there, you know, their project, I think, was going to be commercially operable in 2024. You know, they still haven't hammered nail to a piece of wood in 2024. You know, so the one thing the industry will be, they'll be wrong on two things. Number one, how much it's going to cost. You pretty much double or triple whatever it is they tell you it's going to cost. And then project timelines. Very optimistic with those project timelines, and they're much longer. Very unrealistic with those.
Years ago, they came by through White County here, knocked at the door, and they said, we want to buy your mineral rights. I said, okay, yeah, I know, no one else has it, I got it. I said, how much am I going to get? He said, I'm going to give you $15. And then if we drill a well, drill for an oil well, you know, so the oil embargo and all that is going on. And he said, then if we find oil on your land, then you'll get a percentage. If you don't, you get nothing. I said, yeah, but how about me just keeping my rights? And then you find a farm across the street or the highway, and I found out you got your struck oil, I'm not gonna let you go ahead and horizontal drill to my land and steal my oil.
How would you know?
How would I know? That's right. Just drilling and drilling and drilling. I think they're going deeper, but no, they're coming over here and getting my oil.
Right.
So
Yeah, as far as you asked about the process and when you would know things, one of the first things they do is start knocking on doors. BP's been knocking on doors for a while. Benton County, Jasper County, Newton County, looking to secure pore space rights, easement rights for pipelines. So that's one of the earliest things they'll do. They'll start knocking on doors. Neighbors will start chattering. And that's when it first starts. So yeah, that's another thing to look out for.
Couple questions. Number one, if this is so safe, why aren't they tunneling underneath Lake Michigan to do it? Because, I mean, you know, it's unpopulated, they could go out a couple miles into the lake and they wouldn't have a problem.
and you got the water pressure pushing down.
I'll tell you something about that with BP, because when I work again.
That's it, BP's up there.
Yeah,
It's
so-
gonna cost them a hell of a lot more to transport it down here than.
We went to a meeting, I don't know if you remember, BP came out here and they tried to wine and dine everyone, and they told everyone how down home they are, they're just like me and you. Me and him, meeting up with him, you know what they told people in Hampton? They go, oh yeah, we're gonna take this pollution and push it where no one lives. That's how they view this area.
The same thing we tried at Wabash Valley Resources. The original idea there, the original stratigraphic test well was close to the plant site. Proposed injection site was very near the plant. But the plant borders what? The Wabash, the river. Who owns that land? State of Indiana. Who owns Lake Michigan? Depends on the state, all the states around it. So part of the answer to that question is they want to minimize exposure to state-owned property and potential liability from states and rather deal with individual property owners rather than state entities.
Well, you know,
Which DNR expressed concerns about the safety of the Wabash, and so miraculously, those injection points moved away from it. Not far enough, but.
And, you know, you know, as a resident here, I've been sick and tired of White County and the area being what I call a carbon credit dumping ground. Because, you know, every the money trail ends in White County someplace. But, it seems like, there are people outside the county that look at us as just that dumping ground.
Well, I can tell you one thing, the money that the wind folks and the solar folks are getting pale in comparison to what these oil and gas guys are gonna get from CCS. I'm not even close.
So I shouldn't buy more stock in oil.
Buy, it's a bearish market, dude. Or a bullish market, what is it, bullish market, there you go. Well, we appreciate it, guys. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I think we're missing one thing, or at least I am. If we're recommended to keep pestering our local officials, what are we going to ask them to do? What can they do?
Well, I think that's, as I said, you ask 4 lawyers, get 8 or 9 different opinions. Greg said.
Jasper County, we were able to get our commissioners to write a ordinance that states that if any company wants to come in and do geological test well, they have to first get a permit from our county.
There you go, that sort of thing. Now your county.
It took us 6 months, but we got it.
Correct. One restaurant, Greg Zeller, the former Attorney General of the state of Indiana, he said he didn't believe these bills took away local control, and locals can do what they want, do just that. Get a permit for this. 2-year moratorium on destruction of CO2 pipelines. 5-year moratorium on whatever. Total prohibition.
See, and that's the sad thing. I know we passed a resolution in this county. We're opposed to it. What did that do? You could have in the same time passed a straight up moratorium. No, we're opposed.
Right, read my lips, no new taxes, right? Yeah.
I would just say it might be nice if there's a way to circulate the actual content of that resolution, so that folks can go to county officials, so they have something in their hand and say, this is,
I'm glad you mentioned that. Groups like CAC who do this on a statewide basis, local government websites, some of them are completely useless. I forget what county I was in, but I was in a county where the most recent minutes were like 2021.
2 years ago.
If they even get posted at all. So it is incredibly important, all of these various groups, coalitions that are working together, in a dream ideal world, there would be some sort of central repository where everybody working at this stuff, at whatever level you're working on it, could have some sort of central repository for, here's an ordinance from Warren County on there, here's an ordinance from Clinton County, Illinois, here's so on and so forth. It is really, really hard to get hold of that stuff.
Could CAC start to be an archive for those kinds of things?
We created one for, nobody really uses it though.
Well, let's
Yeah.
people have to.
That's part of the problem. People get fractured, people go in different directions, people get tired, people get so tired. I have told people fighting this Wabash rally, I tell people this in other campaigns we've been in, this is going to go on for years. For years. Slow down. Slow down, take a breath, because people will get, of course you will, especially if it's your property. If it's your property, your community, you're pissed. You want to fight, and you will exhaust yourself, run out of energy, and that frequently leads to total complacency, throwing up your hands going, whatever. So pace yourself. These projects are measured in years, not weeks and months. They go on and on and on. The fight is long.
And just to add, it's a very easy ask to just say, we need to learn about this more. We need time to assess this, we need time to talk to our neighbors, we need time to learn about the science and see what's happening in other places. So even if the long-term goal is to prevent it, a much easier ask is to be able to say, we can't rush this. This is our water, this is our land. It's not something to play around with. So that's a baseline ask that is in much allowable context. Yeah.
Well, thanks everybody.